And welcome to today's webinar exploring the energy procurement outlook for housing associations beyond 2024. This afternoon's event, sponsored by Enenco, will take both a practical look at how individual providers are shaping their own plans and provide an overview of the external conditions organisations need to factor into their thinking. Obviously, we all know the long-term goals for the sector when it comes to delivering net zero by 2050 and the various staging posts along the way. Different areas are looking to move faster too, with housing providers in the northeast saying they could potentially deliver earlier than 2050, for example, with the right support. Then there are more immediate drivers, such as cost savings in a world where providers are more stretched than ever before, thanks to a combination of increased regulatory scrutiny, quality and safety issues, and a wider housing crisis, which means the pressures to deliver new homes is also high. Outside factors continue to make medium and long-term decision-making tricky. Wholesale energy prices continue to be unpredictable due to geopolitical instability and supply chain issues. And domestic policy changes, coupled with the forthcoming general election, mean the next 12 months contain their own uncertainties and shifts too. To help with that forward planning, we've got a panel of experts on hand to talk us through their thinking and provide some clarity to help you make more informed decisions about energy procurement. And we'll be talking about practical steps people can take to put themselves on the best possible footing when negotiating contracts too. We'll be hearing from Richard Orr, Head of Asset and Regeneration at Riverclyde Homes, Stuart Gaydon, Procurement Category Manager at Green Square Accord, Jacob Briggs, Senior Consulting Analyst at Cornwall Insight, and Dan Padesi, Chartered Energy Manager at Enenco. But before we kick things off, a quick poll to see where you all are, and just to get a bit of a feel for the audience today. Fairly broad poll, but if we can put the poll on the screen now, and yeah, we'll just activate the event poll. And yeah, the question there is, do you have an energy procurement strategy beyond 2024? So we'll just give you a few seconds to answer that, and the answers yes, no, and don't know. It'll be interesting to see what the don't knows, I think, on this one. So yes, do you have an energy procurement strategy beyond 2024? So just to give us a bit of a feel for where you are in the room today. So yeah, just a few more seconds to click on to track the poll down, click on the results there, and now yeah, we'll just gather the poll results, and let's see where we are. Yeah, interesting split. So yeah, about 26% of you yes, 37% no, and then yeah, interesting. I thought that might be an interesting one. So 37% don't know. So quite a split between the three categories today. So yeah, that's yeah, useful just to get a bit of a feel for where you are. Right. Before we launch into the presentations, just one more reminder, and that is that this is your opportunity to ask the questions that are going to be most useful to inform your thinking moving forwards and to take back to your own organisations. So yeah, please do use the question and answer box, which should be on the screen. So use that question and answer box and ask questions throughout today's event, and I'll pick up on as many as I possibly can following the presentations. So yeah, just a reminder to use that Q&A box throughout the presentations, and I'll pick up on as many as possible at the end. So yeah, thank you all very much for tuning in today, and without further ado, Richard, welcome, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so as Martin's already introduced, Richard Orr from Riverclyde Homes. If we move to the next slide, please. I think normally when I do these presentations, they kind of go on for 20-30 minutes, and I have an 8-minute slot today. So rather than pretending I know lots of the answers, I've taken the approach of kind of asking more questions today, both for brevity and I think actually, if at the end of today we're left questioning why we're doing what we're doing, I'll be a lot happier than me just telling you what we're doing. So the first question, that I pick up from the brief that was sent out to us is, for my own curiosity, that the language that's used around energy, and maybe if you're on this call, you're more comfortable with these types of questions, and the ideology of what energy, or the understanding of what energy security is. But I think the language, when I think, if I use the language of energy security in a social housing provider, I think people would instinctively say, well, no, I'm not sure what that has to do with us. But I think for me it's an important question, and really, if the cost of energy was affordable for businesses and consumers, we probably wouldn't need to have to ask ourselves this question. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a few slides before I come on to River Clyde Homes, just to kind of provide a wee bit of context and thinking. The first one is unashamedly Scottish policy. Really, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to run through these item by item. The point I'm really trying to make is, regardless of where you are in the country, as a social housing provider, we have demands and legislation on us that requires us to get our stock and our performance to a higher energy standards. And broadly, the policies there are intended to impact the customer in the building, and they dedicate and dictate how we deliver our investment through the fabric of the building. And I'm not entirely sure that the legislation in a broader sense really does that. I think there's a misalignment of finance that sits against that. And in Scotland, we've traditionally been working towards what we would refer to as the EISH standard, the energy efficiency standard for social housing, which has been evolved and moved on from a banding system. It's under consultation at the moment. But ultimately, I think the most important piece of policy, and as I come on to my later slides, it might make more sense why. But the most important piece of legislation there is actually a local authority requirement for the LHE strategy, that every local authority has to produce a plan for the heating in its area, much like the Danes did a number of decades ago. And that's really, really useful. There is an impetus and an emphasis from the Scottish Government on that being forms of low-cost district heating, and but broadly, having a plan, knowing what your energy source is really critical to understanding the investment choices you make later, and knowing that you're not going to be superseded. Next slide, please. I think, just going back to the original question, I think that the language that most of the housing sector will be a lot more comfortable with is, along these types of questions that we can ask ourselves. How do we ensure sustainable homes and communities? How do we deliver affordable warmth? How do we create and indeed deliver, particularly where you've got shared ownership? Those are not necessarily the same thing. Investment programs that attain or move towards those standards. How do we have those impacts on the customers? And ultimately, our challenge is to develop solutions to tackle fuel poverty. It's about how do we impact our customers first, and at the same time, we recognise that convergence of government policy and standards to say that tackling carbon emissions is also a key outcome for the world. That's, as I say, that goes into all of the policy documents, but there is an opportunity to combine those outcomes. But I think we're more comfortable with that as a set of language, rather than the original premise of energy security and those types of things. It's really just a question of how we deliver that. Next slide, please. So a little bit on River Clyde Homes. We are an organisation, an RSL, a registered social landlord is the term in Scotland, that provides just over 6,000 homes. We're an ex-stock transfer organisation, and we cover the most central to our area is the most deprived part of Scotland, but we've many in the top 10 across our fairly small geographic area of Inverclyde and the west coast of Scotland. As an organisation, we are part of the High Performance Buildings Initiative and the Buildings Actions Coalition, which is aligned to UNEP, and that's great for us in terms of wider learning and opportunities. And it probably shows the expertise that we've been able to amass within the team. I recognise every RSL, or local authority for budget reasons and all of these things, it's not easy for us to attract and deliver the best staff. And I think, I suppose the point for us is there's an opportunity there for shared learning. We're learning all the time. It's not to say that as great as my team is that we know all of the answers, but I think for us there's an opportunity there for us to share what we're trying to do with any organisation that's looking to learn and take forward some of the conversations. Another thing is, as an ex-stock transfer organisation, we also have an inordinate amount of land assets that wouldn't be typical for an RSL, that allows us greater flexibility and deliverability. Next slide, please. A wee bit of repetition in this. I just really like the imagery of this. As an RSL, we have a wide range of housing stock from pre-1919 sandstone tenements, typical on the west coast of Scotland, but all the way through the different housing models. In this image alone, you can see a whole variety of different tenemental flatted style accommodation. There's probably, I think, 6 high rises in there. This is the centre of Greenock, so this is the most deprived part of Scotland. And the things that you wouldn't be able to necessarily pick out from this image, but this area also includes council offices, leisure facilities, and a whole bunch of other things beyond just our completely varied housing stock. Next slide, please. So going back to the LK strategy, we're working with we're going back. Sorry, we're working with the local authority to develop out what that might look like. This is an indicative plan that shows the area of Inverclyde. What you can see there is an awful lot of green on the map, and indeed the water in front of us, and quite a highly concentrated area of housing, quite densely packed housing. Really what that means is when you've got a big hill behind you, the water in front of you, and a densely packed area, there's a huge opportunity for us to benefit from the development of low cost district heating systems that cover scale, that give us a great opportunity. I would say though that whilst we are at the firth of the River Clyde, I don't think I've been to a city in the UK that doesn't have a big river running through it. In fact, I'm not sure I've been to any big city in the world that doesn't have a big river running through it, and doesn't have highly densely populated areas of accommodation adjacent to large users of energy, whether that be council offices, leisure centres, prisons, hospitals. So I think the opportunity, whilst ours is great and small and easy to exhibit, in that sense, I think the opportunities there are there for everybody, one way or another, to consider how and the best way to deliver that affordable warmth to our customers. Next slide, please. This is an example. It's not ours. This is an example across the water. One of the kind of leading members of the team that delivered this in Western Bartonshire over at the other side of the Clyde now is in my team, so we know it exceptionally well. This is an image of the Queen's Quay district heating scheme, which provides what you can't see in this imagery is you've got a college to the left, you've got the hospital off to the hospital off to the left, a college off to the right, and high density housing behind it, and the opportunity there to deliver low cost heating. Just now they're paying about 8 pence a kilowatt hour for heating and hot water to those homes, and it's just a question of the art of the possible. The question of energy security, I don't have a slide in this, but there are in Scotland, you've got Ore Valley, for example, who have a wind turbine which just transacts with the grid. But my point is the technologies and the opportunities aren't unique to any individual association, and they are slightly place based. Next slide, please. For us, going back to that point I started on earlier, we have, once we know the areas that are going to have low cost district heat, which won't be all of our homes, we hope it will be as much as 60% of our homes. What it allows us to do is take this view on the extent of which the fabric improvements are being made or are needed, and the opportunity for those heat networks. It then also allows us to consider what other opportunities for low cost energy are available into the zones that aren't a part of a district heating network. Next slide, please. conscious of time. And really this slide is just about that. It's about striking that balance. You know, in areas where you have no choice but to have high cost energy, you probably are going to end up in a position with significant fabric improvements required. But yeah, I mean, it's probably not 100%, but the point is you can scale back if you have low cost energy, because really that's the impact we're trying to have. Next slide, please. Last couple of slides. Really, the point I'm trying to make here is, and this is an image taken from Living Places, who we work with. If people are familiar with the work that Rufus and his team do, this is a finance model. I'm not going to talk us through this. The point is that in order to get the financing right for all of our mechanisms, we're going to need to consider multiple outcomes, whether it be outcome buyers, public funding, institutional investment. And we need to consider how we deliver that finance. And really the point for having it is to move on to the next slide. It is to ask this question, you know, what is our aim? Are we trying to provide comfort? Are we trying to provide you know, something that is truly sustainable in terms of a home? And I ask myself this question all the time. So I thought I would kind of finish today with this question around, you know, if the finance models are asking us to reconsider how we provide and what we provide, you know, is the historic model of what social housing is in terms of 4 walls and a roof really what we want to deliver? Is that suitable for 2024? The stat that I love to use is post-pandemic, the private rented sector talks about probably for the first time in decades, I can't remember the exact stat offhand actually, now I'm planning on using it, but since the pandemic, the most searched term is bills included. So, you know, rather than for decades, it was about, can I take a pet? So if we recognize the world is changing, we recognize that you know, for me, things like access to the internet for attainment and indeed staying current for kids watching Netflix and attending school and all of those things, I think there's a genuine question we need to ask ourselves about what it is we're trying to provide and what is a social house. Because if we're building it today in 2024 or retrofitting it today in 2024, we need to think about what it really is going to be in 2050. You know, and that's before you get to questions of home offices and all of these types of changes. Just the basic amenity of what we're trying to provide. So that for me is the most important question that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis. So I thought that was a good point to finish.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just finding the mute button. And yeah, a great presentation and a really interesting question to finish on. I think we will return to that question before too long. What does a social home need to be in 2024 and beyond? Thank you very much, Richard. And I should say just a quick reminder that obviously as we're going through an opportunity to ask the questions that are most pressing for you and that are going to be most useful to you both in your jobs and for your organisations. So please do use that question box to ask away as we go along, and I'll get through as many as possible following their presentations. So thank you, Richard, and Stuart. Welcome, and the floor is yours. I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Martin. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Stuart Gaydon, so I work at Green Square Accord Housing Association. We're an RSL, and just for a bit of context, we have 24,000 homes over mainly the West Midlands, Gloucester, Oxford, Wiltshire. Just over 1,300 communal supplies, predominantly power, non-half hourly, maybe 50 half hourly, and 206 gas. We have an annual budget of 4.6 million. And I've just got 2 further slides just to give you a few of my personal thoughts about energy procurement. Thank you, Tiff. Over the last 3 years, and then a bit more detail about the journey we've been on for AMR installation. So, in terms of client appeal, I've worked for 30 years in the housing sector. I'm used to being quite an attractive client. People want to work with us. We generally have work. We have money. We pay people on time sometimes, but I've noticed in the energy sector that's not really quite the case. We're not all that attractive actually. We tend to have hundreds, thousands of supplies, some with very low usage. So we're not that attractive to a lot of suppliers out there, and some are actually leaving the market. We're not like a hospital, school, industrial estate where there's maybe one or small number of meters, massive usage. There's also some suppliers who we've chosen for performance or other reasons not to work with. So the supplier pool is reducing for us when we go to market, which is a concern that we can still achieve best value and a good rate for our customers. Something else I've noticed in the last 3 years is the non-commodity charges have really rocketed, more than historic levels, I would say. And even when we're going out to market and getting some good deals on the kilowatt hours, you find they're being eroded by non-commodity charges. There's a big push now for AMR requirement, which is what we'll just touch on the final slide, and what we've been doing on that. We've done a lot of work on portfolio consolidation. We're kind of 4 housing associations that have kind of merged over the last couple of decades. The most recent merger just less than 3 years ago. So we used to have 6 different contracts for gas, half hourly, non-half hourly. We've now brought that down into one portfolio, co-terminating dates, etc., and that's proved beneficial. Another positive thing we've done just about a year ago, we got some central coordination. We have a utility management coordinator now that everything goes through that person. All the new supplies, the COTS in, COTS out, billing, invoicing, budget coding, checking, all that stuff, arranging all the access issues, and that's been really positive. Certainly the last 2 years, lots of resident concerns. Obviously, we've got shared owners, leaseholders, customers receiving this service, and the costs have really gone up, haven't they? I think across the board in the last 2 years, which is proving difficult for many. Again, my experience, housing associations kind of risk averse, and we've always had 100% fixed contracts. More recently, we've gone with 25% trend, and that has proved to offer a saving to us, actually. So it's something for you to think about yourselves, perhaps. And the energy broker services, if you haven't got a good one, I would go out and get one. If I was you, they're worth their weight in gold. They're really good to work with. We have monthly contract meetings. There's lots going on now with gas and electric. And with the AMR rollout, we have a smaller group that meets weekly. So it's very focused. Last slide, please, Tiff. So on the AMR, so probably for about a year now, we're really trying to get our 1,300 meters installed with smart meters, changed over to smart meters rather. So the suppliers are mandated, I think by the end of next year, or someone more skilled than I would know that. By the end of next year, I think they need to get those installed, or there are some fines. So this may result in contracts being withdrawn, or your contract extension not being honoured or refused, or restrictions applied. And it's just reducing that market for us to go to get the best deal. So I think installing AMR across the piece is going to really help us to be more attractive, for one thing, along with all the other benefits it will bring. So the program we went on, how do we target them? So the suppliers we work with, they've got some very specific sites they want to see them installed at. We also want to hit all half-hourly meters, the ones that have been estimated for a long period of time. We're over more than 4 counties, so geographically we wanted to bunch things together, and we wanted to target high usage. Biggest issue we found, of course, access. I just found I begged, stealed and borrowed some master keys there. I got 6 of them, which I thought was a bit of an oxymoron in itself. Anyway, still wasn't enough. We got the right key codes, the fobs, trying to get into meter cupboards, boiler rooms, communal areas, as difficult as it's perhaps historically been. Always a challenge. Once you get in, some of the installation difficulties we've experienced. The meter's just too big, won't fit. So the top left there, you'll see a very busy meter cupboard. There just isn't the space. The smart meters are slightly bigger often than the meter they're replacing. Maybe the backboard's loose, the cutouts loose, there's oversized fuse, there's a bit of damage or concerns raised that we want to get the DNO to look at. Or the tail feed's just too tight. There's just not enough plane in the cables to fit the thing. These are the kind of things that are going on. Multiple installers, again, that's another challenge. So some suppliers are just managing it themselves, and other suppliers subcontracted it out. That subcontractors sub it out again, different locations. So you're dealing with kind of 3 different AMR installers, which 3 sets of meetings. We have sites with gas and electric that we want to change, but a lot of the engineers we've noticed haven't got the skill set to do both, so that's more than one visit. Some of the landlord supplies are linked to the apartments, so we're having to isolate that and do all those communications to residents to say your power will be off on this day for this length of time. Some maybe HMOs or rooms, houses converted into rooms. You know, the actual landlord's meter is in someone's apartment or their room. Just more communication and more access things to think about. Meter location unknown. Some meters just can't find them. Amazing, I know, can't find them. People have left, moved on, retired, changed patches. Is it in this cupboard, that cupboard? If we're not sure, so there's one or two where we're just really struggling to find the actual meter. So there's a bit of Miss Marple going on there, trying to locate them. I found the installers actually really good. The companies I've worked with, you usually get a free hit on the first visit. They'll try and go there. We're giving people, you know, as many names, emails, contact numbers, central person to ring if they can't get access. But if they don't get the job done on the first attempt, they will ask for joint visits thereafter. One of the other issues, ECOS, is that there's a magic system that a lot of us mortals will never have access to. This is more for DNOs, suppliers, brokers, where they can go and look at the history of an address or a serial number of the meter. Because we've had some mismatches where we go to the right address, but the meter serial number is different. So something historically has happened there and the main system's not been updated. So the brokers and suppliers are quite good at looking at that system for you and helping you. One or two supplies as well, no longer responsible for. So again, on the previous slide, make sure your portfolio is just kept up to date. If you've got cots out, we've had some units, offices, etc., where the leases run out, we've moved on. Somebody at some point didn't fill out the right form 6 months ago, and now we're being chased to fit the AMR, etc. That is obviously going to be something we're not able to do. So keep your portfolio up to date. And then finally, if you think, well, this is going to cost me several £100s to sort, like that top left meter, it's going to cost me several £100s to sort out the wiring to get a smart meter fitted here. What happens if we don't? So one of our suppliers is basically said, well, yeah, notwithstanding the first point about restrictions applied on future contracts, etc., that you would need to provide a physical meter reading on a monthly basis, which I thought was a bit often, but apparently some are asking for weekly, and that needs to be a photo clearly showing the meter reading, the serial number, the date stamp, etc. So I think that's my 8 minutes, so I'll have to stop there. Back to you, Martin. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Yeah, lots to pick up on there, and yeah, a number of questions kind of emerging from that as well. So we'll get to them very shortly. I should say thank you to people who have been sending in questions. We'll get to them very shortly. And just a reminder, do use that question box to ask the questions you want the answers to, and we'll get to them very shortly. So thanks very much for that. Thanks, Stuart and Jacob. Welcome. So now we've looked at how providers in different parts of the UK are planning for the future, the kind of issues that they're wrestling with and thinking about, and now let's kind of get the overview. So Jacob, welcome, and over to you.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Jacob. I'm a senior consultant at Cornwall Insight, and if we skip forward 2 slides, sorry to be a pain, I will, before we jump in and look at kind of where we see current and forecast costs, whether that's the kind of wholesale electricity side, or we will look at, as has been flagged, that increasingly important non-commodity element as well. Just give you a super brief intro or overview for Cornwall. So we are an independent research and consultancy company, basically involved in either kind of regular ongoing research across the energy value chain, from parties looking to generate electricity, the network operators flowing it around, or with suppliers and increasingly end users of different sizes, looking to try and grapple with what all of this means for them as well. So without too much further ado, we'll go on to the next slide and take a look at where some of that ongoing research sits with regards to the different kind of elements of those electricity bills. So we'll start off with a quick kind of primer just on what we see making up the bill, and broadly split across that wholesale electricity, basically the commodity cost element of it, and almost half of the bill come in from that broad collection of non-commodity costs. And of that, we're looking at network charges. So basically your fixed and variable use of system charges for being connected to the distribution or transmission network. And then the policy cost element of the bill as well. So basically this is where we've lumped together the assorted renewables support schemes. There's a couple of other elements in there, but those are by far and away the biggest single contributor, particularly looking at the renewables obligation making up the biggest chunk of that non-commodity, of the policy cost element in that non-commodity piece. And that final kind of other category, including a few different elements, but notably kind of some of the like shape and fee margin elements that the supplier will be adding onto that bill as well to cover their own operating costs. And it's worth noting that it is not a pure science to translate how these industry-facing cost elements end up getting put through into the kind of product that yourselves as an end user would see. And it can be influenced by a range of different factors, from the purchasing strategy or risk management strategy that you've got in place, as we just heard. I'm sure the importance of that, particularly around, say, the risk appetite that you want to take on, or the requirement that you've got for trying to lock in as much cost certainty as far ahead of time as possible, versus being willing, say, to look at like working with a TPI trade on that near-term market if there is a kind of potential advantage there. But also kind of feeding through elements from the engagement of suppliers in that part of the market, or the route to market that you're looking to use as well. So whether that's working with a TPI, say, and the kind of services that are getting built in there. So having had that kind of quick recap on what goes into the bill, we'll go on to the next slide and take a look at focused in on that wholesale electricity element, so that half of the bill, and what we've seen recently and how that's impacted our kind of forward view of electricity costs out to about the 2030 point. So the forecasting that we're looking at here is based on our benchmark power curve modeling, but basically it's a bottom-up view of the electricity system. So people far cleverer than I at Cornwall will go away and build a view on the power market that we've got in GB, what's going to be needed to meet all of the national level binding policy targets and all of the generating capabilities and demand requirements that we've got, and build out a kind of 30-year view of where we see power prices outturning as a result of that. So in the near term, then, as we kind of step through that chart, so believe it or not, we have actually seen pretty sharp decline in the view on forward power prices compared to when we last looked at this back in Q4 2023, with a lot of that driven by kind of falling gas prices across Europe, with basically higher than previously expected gas stocks supporting or supported by a milder winter, feeding through into decline in gas prices, which have a big impact on the translated power price then for GB, just because there's a very close relationship and use of gas as like the marginal fuel for meeting our power needs, as well as any use in heating as well. And we've seen that feed through into both kind of summer and winter prices falling down, so the red and blue line on the chart respectively. As we look kind of further out over that horizon, then we do see those electricity prices continue to fall, although it's worth noting that although we're talking about declining prices here, that as we look out to 2030, that they do remain above that kind of pre-COVID, pre-2020 level throughout basically that entire period. But that the kind of rise in deployment of more renewables, we see as being able to replace some of the kind of higher marginal cost fueled technologies. So those gas plants, and as of this year, all of our coal plants, for example, and that's contributing to that fall in prices that we see looking forward. It's worth noting as well, though, that just because the overall kind of price we see declining, it doesn't necessarily translate into reduced volatility. And so particularly say that just because the 5-year trend is for, I say, like 10% drop in prices, that they still, if anything, increase in scope for price volatility within the kind of 5 years that make up that overall trend. As we go kind of further out then towards the back end of this 2030 view that we've got here, but out say into the 2040s as we look longer term in that kind of wider modelling, then we start to see that kind of rise in demand levels, say from like electrifying heat and transport to get towards the net zero requirements that we've got set, or for looking at say like the role of hydrogen more broadly, that those increasing electricity demand requirements start to offset some of the fall in marginal cost of power. And as we said, that those power prices do remain elevated above, say, those more historic levels the further out that we look. If we kind of step back from just that kind of wholesale element focus and look at back to those kind of non-commodity cost pieces as well, then we start to see, if anything, a fairly stable view, say probably over the next few years for that kind of overall cost stack for a kind of low voltage network connected non-domestic user, with some of the kind of falls in that volumetric element being offset by the rising role of non-commodity charges, which if we flick onto the final slide, we'll see that there is both a kind of direct and indirect role played by policy costs. If we could just pop on to the next slide, sorry. With, oh, that's a relief, sorry. I'd forgotten that we got animation on there, so that could have gone much worse. That those policy cost changes can feed through both in that kind of network charging and kind of renewable support part of the bill, with changing just costs basically set to rise over the next 5 years, and capacity market elements also coming through, alongside kind of wider changes, particularly around like the cost exposure for energy intensive industries being increased, which means that some of that shortfall then gets picked up by other parties in the market, but that there are also kind of spaces for indirect impacts on the bill as well, whether that's through, say, encouraging engagement with green purchasing options through stuff like power purchase agreements, say, to try and get some of that longer term price certainty as a customer, or through engaging in what's been a pretty volatile market for green certificates as well, but also with that kind of view to a post-election horizon as well, and what the future for engaging with domestic electricity customer and non-domestic electricity customer regulations look like as well. We're not on time. I think that probably covers the main bits we wanted to talk to, but happy to cover anything off in the Q&A session once we're done. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Jacob. Sorry, just took a few seconds for the camera to warm up. Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, really great overview, and a lot to kind of pick up on and discuss. And just a reminder, thanks, there's lots of questions coming through. Please do get yours in, and we'll try and get around as many as possible in the question and answer that follows, the discussion that follows the final presentation. So thank you, Jacob. Dan, welcome, and the floor is yours. It's over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I will try and keep this fairly brief to make sure that we've got plenty of time to cover some questions and answers as we get to the end of the session. But to briefly introduce myself, Dan Pardesi, Senior Consultant at Inenco, and I focus on supporting social landlords, care providers, build-to-rent type organisations to develop energy strategy and in its implementation too. Next slide, please. To briefly introduce Inemco, we're the oldest energy consultancy in the UK. So we've been around for about 54 years now, and we procure and manage about £2.5 billion worth of electricity and gas spend each year for our clients. But increasingly, we're supporting our clients to help manage water and to focus on corporate decarbonisation as well, whether that's looking at data to inform things like carbon reporting or full feasibility studies and renewable energy strategy too. In terms of our scale, we have around 300 people who work directly for us, and we work with around 550 corporate clients, national retailers, commercial property organisations, but specifically some of the largest social landlords in the UK. So today I wanted to perhaps then translate some of what Jacob was talking about into well, what do we actually do about it, and what do we recommend for social landlords, and touch on then some of the supporting really what that means for social landlords and how you can continue to manage that in an ongoing basis. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on in terms of the market was the market cycle. So in history, we have seen the market cycle over periods of 4 to 6 years. Now, the current market cycle started at a very defined low point in 2020 with COVID, which caused everybody to move to working from home and industrial demand to reduce, which pushed down prices. And we definitely saw the top of the market cycle in 2022 at the height of the energy crisis. The question is, of course, then, when is the end of this market cycle? And the reason why that question is really important is because, in effect, it's far better to take a long-term defensive energy strategy at a low point in the market than it is to contract periodically throughout the cycle and to see prices rise and to see volatility in prices as well. Particularly important for social landlords who, in effect, need to set service charge and provide clarity on what energy costs are going to be. I thought it was really interesting, Richard's point about the most popular search term being bills included. I think that gives a nod to the sector's demand for clarity on what energy costs are going to be. Next slide, please. So if we just take a little look back at history, this shows the cost of a fixed price 12-month contract going right back to 2016. And if we look at the sort of the pre-2020 era, you can see that the market now looks, by today's standards, relatively flat. There was still significant volatility through that time. At the time, we thought it was significant. But what worked back then in terms of perhaps placing fixed price 12-month contracts may have sort of resulted in a few percent volatility year on year and relatively little impact on overall service charges. Since 2020 and since the energy crisis, we've moved into really a new era in the energy markets where prices are significantly more volatile and can move by significant amounts. And that, I think, means that we have to look at a different type of energy strategy, one that is fit for today's energy market drivers and changes. In effect, since the war in Ukraine, we've moved to a European gas market, which is far more driven by liquefied natural gas prices rather than piped Russian gas. Liquefied natural gas is by its very nature super chilled and transported around the world in cargo ships, and hence far more volatile and slightly more expensive in terms of its overall cost. Now, if I just flick onto the next slide, it's also worth saying that energy is a tradable commodity out into the future, and as Jacob mentioned there, prices are available in the market these days until roughly the end of the decade. At the moment, we do see the market is, and for several years now, we've seen the market is in what we call backwardation, where it's cheaper the further out that you look. So buying in the very near term for the next available 12 months is usually the most expensive price that you can see. So many housing associations these days are choosing to take a longer term strategy, in effect to secure prices further in advance whilst they're cheaper, and also giving them greater visibility and ability to budget for what service charges need to be out into the next couple of years. I've dropped on there a dotty red line at £50 a megawatt hour. The relevance of that line is, by our calculations, that's roughly the 10-year average price running up to COVID in 2020. And at that time, that was based on a market that was heavily supplied by Russian gas, relatively plentiful Russian gas. These days, the market is different. We're more reliant on LNG, as I said, which is slightly more expensive by its very nature and slightly more volatile. The difference between those two lines is relatively little at the moment. And I think that just shows to us that actually now there is relatively little scope for the current prices to move significantly downwards. But there is, to Jacob's point, quite a lot of risk in terms of volatility that could be driven by any of the current market drivers, perhaps what's going on in the Middle East, the situation in Ukraine, or indeed the global economic outlook and the rise in competition for liquefied natural gas cargoes. So in effect, now seems like there's relatively little downside potential in the market, but quite a lot of upside risk. Next slide, please. So how can we prepare to go to market? Stuart touched on the metering challenge. So we have seen the UK market try to roll out smart meters, and that has been a big challenge in this sector. Rolling out smart meters when we don't know where those meters are, when access is difficult, and perhaps that they're in very tight meter cupboards is quite a challenge. The inability to roll out smart meters does make housing associations less attractive to suppliers who are now quite heavily fined if they don't meet their own smart meter rollout targets. So I'd really stress there that rolling out of smart meters and putting a program in place to achieve that in conjunction with either a consultant or the supplier will really help you be able to attract supplier offers in the future and therefore to be able to drive best value. Equally, since the energy crisis, we've seen credit and debt be a significant issue in the entire of the energy market. And with the complexity of portfolios and the size of portfolios that many housing organisations have, keeping on top of payment and making sure that your portfolio is debt-free really stands you in good stead to be able to attract offers and also to bring down costs that are charged in the future. Also, it's worth mentioning that good procurement takes time. It takes time to decide what the right approach and procurement strategy should be for the organisation, and typically that might involve numerous different stakeholders from procurement, estates, service charge, finances, and so on. So it's really worth starting that process early, and also then to develop the perhaps program or decision making around things like Section 20 compliance and even Section 20 dispensation to allow you to contract for a longer period of time. A quick nod there, though, it's also in the context of the cleanest and cheapest kilowatt hour is always the one that goes unused. So this should always be in a sort of a wider program of energy reduction to reduce usage. Now, just quickly, last slide. I thought it's worth saying that also going to market and putting in place your procurement strategy is one part of it. Managing that contract in life is also a really important part of delivering best value to tenants and residents. We find that 1 in 4 bills from suppliers contains an error, and there is growing complexity in those non-commodity charges. I'm sure you will have noticed increases in standing charges due to recent changes. So it's worth making sure that you've got some support there to really check those invoices are correct and check that you're recharging the right amount to tenants and residents. But also those non-commodity charges can sometimes be wrong. They're worth challenging where there's cause to. And some of the work that we've done, for example, with 13 Group up in the Northeast, meant that they secured recoveries in excess of £1 million. Not only that, but they also use the data consolidation and the data checking service to really pull that data into one place and hence use that to drive out some decarbonisation opportunities and energy reduction opportunities. Now, I think that's all that we've got time to go through today. So thanks for your time and look forward to some questions.
Thanks very much, Dan. And yeah, plenty of questions coming in, which I will try to get through a cross section of. We've got about 10 minutes left to get through them. So I'll welcome back our speakers to the room, and I'll start with perhaps a broad one that came up while Jacob was speaking. So Jacob, just your 30-second warning. Question from Paul. We are continually told that renewable energy will be cheaper because it is secure and not subject to volatile oil or / gas prices. But most wind generated electricity is sold on the open market and therefore is subject to that volatility. Do you see significant changes to the energy market, and would you support the nodal pricing system based on location, basically, which lots of other European countries use? So a nice big, broad question to get started, and then we'll there's questions coming through about smart meters. We'll move into them with some of the panelists shortly.
Cool. I think this goes to show that nowhere is safe from a question about retail electricity market reform. So we can start the back end bit of that. So there is currently a massive program of works going on, the review of electricity market arrangements, to basically answer some of these questions, right? How can we most effectively try and decouple the cost of renewable electricity from fossil fuels, and how can we and one of the potential tools to deliver a net zero capable high to full renewable penetration market is to look at zonal pricing. So like I said, basically looking at whether there's a way to move from a kind of single national price for power, which is where we are today, to prices set within zones, and basically higher charges for zones or regions compared to the cost of basically generating electricity there. So they are open questions that there is, I think, still alive, but back in March, the government department put out the most recent consultation on how to progress. I think we moved from about 30 options for kind of fundamental ways to design a market to much fewer. I think like probably 3 broad options getting carried through, but with a ton of nuance under them. So, sorry, short answer is there's definitely some interesting implications for moving away from that single price and looking at kind of regional impacts, making sure that those can deliver the like ultimate goal of that net zero capable system is probably the main thing to try and keep as we move through this consultation process. But yeah, it is a live discussion with that kind of regional model on the table.
Thanks very much, and Paul, thanks for getting the ball rolling with yes, a very detailed question. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to move into quite a specific question, but I think an issue that certainly a lot of our readers will be and our audience will be wrestling with, and this is one that Dan came up in your presentation, came up in a few presentations actually, just in terms of the smart meter rollout. So a question from Debbie. Dan, our housing association, has issued a Section 20 for a long-term cap strategy, but been told no supplier will offer this now to social housing due to issues with the rollout of smart meters. What's Inenco doing to rectify this? But what can housing associations do to commence smart meter replacement program if the current energy supplier doesn't want to engage? So yeah, and I'll probably move to the rest of the panel after this, because yeah, Dan, obviously we're talking about making your organisation or making the sector attractive to suppliers, and obviously this is an issue that Debbie has kind of run into. So yeah, how do you kind of position your organisation to be more attractive, perhaps?
Well, I think just to sort of start off with, there's the suppliers are mandated to roll out smart meters by 2025 is the current deadline. So at the moment, whether it's your incumbent supplier or a new one, the supplier that you have is mandated to roll out smart meters and should be trying. What I'd suggest is trying to work with that incumbent supplier and build a project around it to make sure that it's supported from your side as the owners of those sites and portfolios, and to try and make sure that you can provide things like access and some coordination to actually make sure that these meters are improved, upgraded to smart meters. I think ultimately getting those smart meters in is going to be a real big sort of precursor to being able to access long-term strategies. It's fair to say that piece of legislation is not in sort of isolation from other government legislation as well. I think there is some supplier nervousness around legislation that was brought in as part of the Energy Act last year, which looks to provide increased protections to domestic customers who receive their energy via heat networks in particular, or via recharges from other organisations. So I think it's sort of difficult to sort of pick it out into one specific answer, but I think the best place to start at the moment is to make sure that you've got those that program to roll out smart meters as quickly as possible, to work with the supplier and your consultants to make that happen, and to sort of follow policy updates as they happen.
Thanks very much. And I know I've got about 5 minutes left, so I will whisk through some questions quite quickly. But do Richard and Stuart, do please come in on that point if you want to add to it. I think there's a question that's come through from Ben. It's a recommendation to go for a mix of fixed and trend rates. And Stuart, I'll maybe bring you in first, because you were talking about, I think, that kind of 75-25% split that you're going for. So yes, what's the recommendation there, and what's kind of thought processes that perhaps Ben might want to be considering?
Yeah, well, I think your broker can give you some predictions, if you like, but it just comes down to each individual business and what appetite they've got for risk, I think, and given where the market's been going, we felt that just having a small amount, our executive board agreed that we go with 25% on this range. So from now up until October 2026, we're now in contract in that split. And as I say, just the first 6 months, it's been a saving on against fixed, but that can change, as Dan will probably know more about.
Thanks, Rory. Okay, and Richard, I'll come to you next on that question. And actually, just one thing, just very quickly, before I move to you. Actually, one of the things you were mentioning, the local heat and energy efficiency strategies published, and I will just do a quick plug, because earlier this year we did survey and take a look at all of the published, because they had to publish, I think, at the end of last year, strategy. So just a quick plug that if you want more information on what they are telling you in Scotland, there's quite a lot of detail on the Inside Housing website at the moment, so do go and take a look. So yeah, Richard, again, that question to you.
Yeah, Absolutely, and I think just to pick up on that point very briefly on the LE strategies, Martin, this year is the detailed plan. So last year was the sort of high level plan. This year's the detailed plan. So that's an evolving outcome for all local authorities. And I think, you know, the simple point I try to make is, even if your local authority, if you're in England or Wales and your local authority isn't doing that, taking the planned approach to how you're going to provide heat is crucial regardless of the context. But yeah, I mean, in terms of just to pick up slightly on the question of smart meters, we've been doing it passively. Or, you know, from an operational point of view, we already have about 900 homes on district heating and metering, you know, where we are the energy provider. Beyond that, it's up to the customers effectively to arrange and pay their own energy. For us, that's a transition through our void process that we've been putting smart meters in now for, I would say probably we started the process pre-COVID. That was probably slightly delayed, you know, as a consequence of COVID, to put an exact number on it. But of our approximate 5,000 homes, probably about a third of those now have smart metering in, but it's just done passively as the properties become void, as opposed to an active push to try and put them in everywhere. And you know, from our perspective, because the consumers or the customers pay that directly to the energy provider, it's not even necessarily something we've historically monitored, but it's something we've now started to collect data on as we put in environmental sensors and try to gauge the outcome. So it's maybe just a slightly different approach to smart metering and delivery of energy for our context.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks both. Actually, yeah, for really insightful answers. We are crashing out time. I'm going to run you through a very quick question, so a 20-second answer, if that's all right. Apologies, but we're out of time. Carol's question: when energy suppliers make errors on bills, our brokers are uninterested once their sales are complete. And basically, I think it's a question about being a small housing association, a kind of micro business that Carol refers to as. So where does the support and advice come from if you're a smaller business? How do you kind of get some of the kind of that kind of problem about being attractive or people paying an interest to you?
I think this can sometimes be the difference between sort of smaller scale energy contract brokers and larger, more supportive energy consultants who will work with you to put these solutions in place. So I'd advise to look at the market and to come and speak to organisations like an Enco.
Right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I've got through hopefully a decent number of the questions that came through. Apologies if you asked and we didn't get to yours, but hopefully we covered a cross section from the kind of more detailed questions to the kind of overview type of questions as well. So all that remains for me to do is to thank our panelists for a great series of presentations, some really great insight there, and a really great discussion at the end. To you all for tuning in today, and thank you. I hope that has given you some practical takeaways for your own organisations, and thank you also to Enco for sponsoring and making today possible. So yes, we will see you all next time, and thank you all for tuning in. Thank you.